Hi, my name's Mark Birch, and I'd like to share with you through several videos the Easter eggs which William Shakespeare had hidden in his first folio. More specifically, 3 of his plays, The Tempest, Henry IV Part 1, and As You Like It, which point to a treasure hidden in his grave. In Shakespeare's England, there was no freedom of speech. Sharing your thoughts publicly could get you imprisoned, or even worse.
I think Shakespeare had been writing plays for years that had to be sanitized for the public. From at least the writing of Henry IV Part 1, he had been working on a project to bring his thoughts to life after his death. Believing himself close to death and running out of time, he brought his friend and fellow playwright Ben Jonson into his confidence. Ben Jonson was sympathetic to Shakespeare's cause, having been imprisoned at one time because of a play he had collaborated on. Shakespeare told Jonson of his need to have a collection of his plays published in folio form. Ben Jonson liked the idea and would publish a collection of his own plays in folio the year Shakespeare died. Since Ben Jonson was a writer, Shakespeare would have relied upon him to help edit the collection for publication when his acting company, the King's Men, were ready to release his plays. One important request he made was that they place his last play, written without collaboration, first in the collection. The clues or Easter eggs in The Tempest are key to understanding his project. Another editorial request was for the volume to be divided into 3 separate folios. The comedy, history, and tragedy folios each have their own pagination. This may seem unnecessarily awkward, but its purpose is to show the importance of the number 3. When clues are presented in threes, it helps us to grasp their significance. Most of the Easter eggs come in sets of 3, or some form of the number 3 is involved. Ben Jonson's eulogy to Shakespeare in the first folio begins with a 16-line prologue. The actual eulogy doesn't start until line 17 with "Soul of the Age." In his prologue to the eulogy, Ben Jonson wants us to know that praising his friend Shakespeare and his works is not the main purpose of the eulogy. Its main purpose is helping us to overcome our ignorance and blindness. With similar wording near the end of the eulogy, we find what the prologue was preparing us for. Shake a lance, as brandished at the eyes of ignorance. A lance is the type of spear found on Shakespeare's coat of arms. With this play on the name Shakespeare, he is giving us an example of the Easter eggs we should look for hidden in Shakespeare's plays. When found, they will open our eyes and remove our ignorance. In The Tempest, Act 1, Scene 2, we find the first Easter egg Ben Jonson was preparing us for. In this exciting narrative, Ariel gives an account of his actions to Prospero. A trident is a 3-pronged spear, so Trident Shake is another play on the name Shakespeare. The first folio was published in 1623. A second edition, or second folio, was published in 1632. Shakespeare's friends from his old acting company, John Hemmings and Henry Condell, who had gathered his plays for publication, had died by 1632. Ben Jonson was still alive and probably consulted on it, and recommended a change to this verse. He asked that they change dread to dead, making it read Dead Shakespeare, providing us with another clue.
Where was I? And now I will unclasp a secret book, and to your quick conceiving discontents I'll read you matter deep and dangerous, as full of peril and adventurous spirit as to overwalk a current, roaring loud on the unsteadfast footing of a spear. Unsteadfast footing of a spear? Holy cow, that's Shakespeare!
This verse is one of what I refer to as William Shakespeare's signatures. In February 2013, I stumbled across this first Shakespeare Easter egg signature as I was reading Henry IV Part 1 during commercial breaks while watching TV. It reminded me of the cameo appearances Alfred Hitchcock would put into his movies. I didn't realize they were called Easter eggs until I saw the movie Ready Player One. This Easter egg shows up at the end of another exciting verse, in which Worcester is trying to draw Hotspur into rebellion against the king. A spear shaft being a rather shaky footbridge, rendering shaky spear or Shakespeare. I rushed to publish what I had discovered at Booksy.com before Shakespeare's 450th birthday on April 23rd, 2013. 2 months later, I was enjoying the play As You Like It for the second time in 2 weeks at the Vortex Theater in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I had returned to share it with family and friends. In Act 5, Scene 1, when Touchstone asks William, "Wast born I the forest here?" I suddenly realized, that's Shakespeare. Much of the play takes place in the Forest of Arden. There was a real Forest of Arden near his hometown of Stratford-upon-Avon. More importantly, it's his mother's maiden name. In all of his plays, this is the only William without a title or last name. This is also the only character born in the Forest of Arden. On the surface, I couldn't see the connection between this William and Shakespeare, but through the dissection of Touchstone's interview with William, it becomes clear. The names he gave his characters often reflect how he wants us to perceive them. His character Touchstone is a great example. Rubbing gold on a touchstone will leave a mark, revealing that it is gold, and to an expert, it will reveal if it is pure gold or a certain alloy. The Shakespeare coat of arms is a gold escutcheon or shield with a black bend or stripe crossing it diagonally, on which is a gold lance or spear. This touchstone is the abrasive test to show us that this William is Shakespeare. Touchstone greets William as gentle friend. The terms gent, gentle, or gentleman in his day referred to people like himself who had a coat of arms. In the year 1599, when he wrote this play, he had received the right to impale the Arden coat of arms onto his Shakespeare coat of arms. When William initially greets Audrey and Touchstone, William removes his hat, and Touchstone asks him to put it back on 3 times. I can imagine Shakespeare playing this part, making fun of himself, or rather his balding head, especially if his daughters were in the audience. When asked his age, William says 25. Shakespeare turned 25 in 1589, the year he began writing his first plays. When asked if he is rich, William answers, so-so. So-so rich, or average rich, is doing pretty well, which he was by the time he wrote this play. In The Tempest, he even names himself Prosper, or Prospero. When asked, art thou wise? I think everyone will agree with William's answer of, "Aye, sir, I have a pretty wit." When asked if he is learned, William answers, "No, sir." And having the real clown make fun of his lack of formal higher education, he is making fun of all those who then and even now deride him for that reason. When Touchstone tries to teach William Latin, he says, "All your writers do consent." Even his friend and fellow playwright Ben Jonson, in his eulogy to Shakespeare, commented on his little Latin and less Greek. Through his character Rosalind, he shares his opinion of Latin studies, referring to it as the burden of lean and wasteful learning. Finally, it was truly ironic to have the clown mock Shakespeare with an English vocabulary lesson. We have seen that Shakespeare has hidden clues or Easter eggs in 3 of his plays, each play containing a different part of his name, binding them together as another clue. 2 of the eulogies to Shakespeare in the first folio give us the clue that the name Shakespeare can be hyphenated or separated into 2 words. Buried deep my bones shall rot, to enrich an earth in sodden plot. Let not this spirit fade away in dusty books on backroom shelves. Break them out and dust them off, that they will not be food for moth. And if my words prove words of truth, then let them chiseled be on monument where all will view, though their author lie in anonymity. The idea of water too deep to measure is shared by these 3 plays alone, further binding them together. From As You Like It, Rosalind tells us that thou didst know how many fathom deep I am in love, but it cannot be sounded. My affection hath an unknown bottom, like the Bay of Portugal. A lead line is a line or rope with a lead weight attached to the end, and distinctive marks at every fathom or 6 feet of length. A sailor will use this to perform soundings, to discover the depth of water. If you lower it into the water as deep as it will go, and it doesn't touch the bottom, the water is too deep to be sounded. In Henry IV, Part 1, it comes just after the signature Easter egg. That's how I made the connection so quickly. Hotspur tells us that he would dive into the bottom of the deep, where fathom line could never touch the ground, and pluck up drowned honor by the locks. In The Tempest, Alonso tells us Therefore, my son Idus is bedded. I'll seek him deeper than e'er plummet sounded, and with him there lie mudded. Later in the Tempest, Prospero tells us something almost identical. I'll break my staff, bury it certain fathoms in the earth, and deeper than did ever plummet sound, I'll drown my book. The purpose of the repetition is to help us to grasp another concept Shakespeare is introducing us to. From these verses, he wants us to understand that deep water and the grave are synonymous. The Tempest was written to develop this idea through variety and repetition. The overarching subjects of the entire play are death, the grave, and restoration. The play begins with a ship in peril. Miranda witnesses it dashed to pieces. Only 3 passengers survived. Ferdinand, chased off the ship by Ariel's static electricity, jumped overboard first and was aided in swimming to shore by Ariel. Stefano avoided drowning by holding onto a keg of wine. And Trinculo swam ashore like a duck. The crew and the rest of the passengers don't have survival stories because they didn't survive. They and the ship, although suffering a watery death, are magically restored. The ship, their bodies, and even their clothes as clean and as good condition as before their ship departed Tunis for Naples. Another important idea connecting these 3 plays is conjuring. In As You Like It's epilogue, Rosalind informs us, "My way is to conjure." In Henry IV Part 1, Glendower tells us, "I can call spirits from the vasty deep." This verse brings the concepts of conjuring the dead and deep water equals the grave together. In The Tempest, as Prospero brags about his use of magic in the play, he tells us, "Graves at my command have waked their sleepers, oped and led him forth by my so potent art." Prospero has the 3 who have wronged him, his brother, the king, and the king's brother, suffer a kind of purgatory. When he decides they are penitent, he has Ariel bring them to a magic circle he is preparing for them. Circles, drawn on the ground, were supposedly used by conjurers to perform their magic, specifically here to fully restore the dead to life. As a consequence of the storm, the ship's crew and most of the passengers had to be released from a watery grave and restored to life. In Act 5, Scene 1, the boatswain tells us, "We were dead of sleep, and how we know not, all clapped under hatches. We were awaked, and straightway at liberty." The similarity between the boatswain's statement and Prospero's brag shows us these were at least part of who Prospero was referring to. How do you hide a ship at a small island? Underwater. In Act 1, Scene 2, Ariel tells Prospero where he hid the king's ship. "Safely in harbor is the king's ship, in the deep nook where once thou callest me up at midnight to fetch dew from the still vexed Bermoose. There she's hid, the mariners all under hatches stowed." A few verses later, Prospero feels the need to question Ariel's dedication, mentioning where Ariel had just been working, asking, "Thinkest it much to tread the ooze of the salt deep?" Soon after Ariel had frightened Ferdinand off the ship and helped him swim to shore, he informed him of his father's death. "Full fathom 5 thy father lies, of his bones are coral made, those are pearls that were his eyes, nothing of him that doth fade, but doth suffer a sea change into something rich and strange. Sea nymphs hourly ring his knell, ding dong, hark, now I hear them, ding dong bell." Ariel shows us that deep water is synonymous with the grave, in that you ring knells with bells in churches for and near the dead. The Tempest character Caliban is vital to deciphering several of Shakespeare's clues, and remains a companion of Shakespeare to this day. Caliban embodies the idea that deep water is synonymous with the grave. Caliban is kept by Prospero in what could best be described as a church floor grave, in or under a ledger stone. As Prospero is rousting Caliban, he calls to him, "Caliban, thou art thou, speak." This odd line is explained later by Antonio, speaking of Gonzalo, dead and buried. He says, "When he is earthed." In Caliban's response to Prospero from within the earth, he says, "Here you sty me in this hard rock." Miranda reinforces the idea a third time, saying, "Therefore wast thou deservedly confined into this rock." Trinculo reinforces the deep water equals the grave idea. Upon seeing Caliban, he says, "What have we here? A man or a fish?" "A fish. He smells like a fish, a very ancient fish-like smell, a strange fish." Later, Trinculo, speaking to Caliban, says, "Thou debauched fish," and "being but half fish." We are told a third time that Caliban is fish-like later in the play. Upon seeing Caliban and his two cohorts, Antonio says, "One of them is a plain fish." Reiterating the water equals the grave idea, we know fish belong in the water, yet this one is kept in a grave. Thinking the unusual name Caliban might be significant, like Touchstone was, I looked more closely at it. Hyphenating Caliban into two words gives us Cali and Ban. Cali is short for caligo in Latin, which means dark or darkness. In the final scene of The Tempest, Prospero tells us, referring to Caliban, "This thing of darkness I acknowledge mine." When Shakespeare uses the word ban in his plays, he means curse. So when Caliban is happy, drunk, and singing, ban, Caliban, he's really saying, curse, curse, dark curse. Trinculo is the third name after Shakespeare and Caliban that can be hyphenated, divided into its constituent parts. The word trin in Latin means three or thrice. Culo in Italian and Spanish means buttocks or bottom, and comes from the Latin word culus with the same meaning. So the name Trinculo means three buttocks. In the final scene, after being told to take his cohorts, Trinculo and Stefano, to trim Prospero's cell, Caliban admits, "What a thrice double ass was I!" The Tempest is allegorical. Prospero's cell represents Shakespeare's grave. As Caliban and his companions are sent to trim or decorate Prospero's cell, they become the decoration or inscription on Shakespeare's grave. In the first sentence of the inscription, Stefano the butler admonishes us not to dig the dust enclosed under the stones. Trinculo the jester provides us with a paradox. If we are not going to dig under the stones, why do we need to spare or be careful with the stones? Finally, Caliban, the curse, finds himself permanently confined in stone.
Methought I saw 1,000 fearful wrecks, 10,000 men, whom fishes gnawed upon, wedges of gold, great anchors, heaps of pearl, unestimable stones, unvalued jewels, all scattered in the bottom of the sea.
Some lay in dead men's skulls, and in those holes where eyes did once inhabit, there were crept as 'twere in scorn of eyes, reflecting gems, which wooed the slimy bottom of the deep, and mocked the dead bones that lay scattered by. How do we know that William Shakespeare, as Prospero, is talking about his grave in the Tempest epilogue? Near the end of the last scene, Prospero tells us that his plan is to retire to his hometown, where he says, "Every third thought shall be my grave." Shakespeare's grave is the nexus of his project. 3 years after his play was written, Shakespeare retired to his hometown of Stratford-upon-Avon. Interestingly, this is the third and final time the words retire, third, and grave are used in the play, each time by or about Prospero. The editing of the Tempest epilogue in the first folio is unusual, and almost always with different punctuation in later editions. It consists of 3 sentences, the first 2 lines being one, the middle 16 lines being another, and the last 2 lines being a third, and indented from the middle sentence like the first sentence. It is seemingly edited more for aesthetics than delivery. At the end of the play, after bidding Ariel farewell, Prospero says, "Please you, draw near." In the epilogue, he is not speaking to a crowded theater, nor as you would expect on behalf of the cast and crew. This is Shakespeare bringing you into his confidence, asking for your assistance so his project will succeed. It probably wasn't added to the play until the first folio. I hope this color-coded key will help you in understanding the epilogue. In this video, I won't be covering lines 5 and 7, but you can pause and read the explanations. Through the entire epilogue, he is speaking to us from the grave, but with the parts in red, he is making it unmistakable. In lines 2 and 3, he says, "What strength I have's my own, which is most faint." It's most faint because he's dead, and these words are all he has. In lines 15 and 16, and lines 19 and 20, he tells us, "And my ending is despair, unless I be relieved by prayer. As you from crimes would pardoned be, let your indulgence set me free." In the play, Prospero had confined his enemies, making them suffer a kind of purgatory for their sins against him, before pardoning them and restoring them to life. The Catholic Church in the early modern period invited people to pay indulgences to the church so that their loved ones who had passed away could be released early from purgatory. In lines 4 and 8, he wants us to understand he is talking about his grave. I must here be confined by you in this bare island by your spell. Notice he is confined in, not on the island. This harkens back to Caliban being confined in what sounds like a church floor grave. If we read lines 15 through 18 together, with the understanding that he is talking about his grave, we can decipher what previously appeared to be an odd paradox. My ending is despair, unless I be relieved by prayer, which pierces so that it assaults mercy itself and frees all faults. William Shakespeare's prayer was that we would figure out his clues and pierce his grave by removing the unusually shaped stone over its west half. This sounds wrong or unmerciful, but it's exactly what he needs us to do in order to free his uncensored works. In line 6 he says, "Since I have my dukedom got." Earlier in the play, Prospero told us, "Me poor man, my library was dukedom large enough." His dukedom is his library, and it is with him even now. Prospero also told us, "I'll break my staff, bury it certain fathoms in the earth, and deeper than did ever plummet sound, I'll drown my book." As we have seen, deep water equals the grave. Shakespeare is telling us his books are in his grave. He wants us to understand that, like the characters in his play, his book, though drowned, or rather in his grave, can be freed. After Prospero states, "Every third thought shall be my grave," Alonso says, "I long to hear the story of thy life, which must take the ear strangely." To which Prospero responds, "I'll deliver all." I think that along with his works, Shakespeare may have cached a journal or at least an explanation in his grave. In Shakespeare's very first Easter egg from Henry IV Part 1, he gave a hint as to what his project is all about. "And now I will unclasp a secret book."
Alas, poor William, there is some confusion as to where your skull is.
In the year 1605, William Shakespeare paid the sum of £440, or roughly $149,000 in 2022 US dollars, for the right to collect and manage the tithes for the maintenance of Holy Trinity Church in Stratford-upon-Avon. I imagine this could potentially be lucrative, but more importantly, it made possible the Shakespeare family burials in the chancel of the church. William's grave is very odd in appearance, as though it was designed to elicit questions. He had years to plan for his grave and supervise its preparation, and it was the first in that area of the floor. He could choose to have it look however he wanted. Why would he have it look so disorganized? The two stones covering his grave are of different colors. The paving stone at the west or head end of his grave is oddly shaped and stretches into the area of his wife Anne's grave. And his grave ledger stone does not give his name or dates. Late in 2015, a GPR or ground-penetrating radar survey was performed over the Shakespeare family graves. Geophysicist Erica Utsi and archaeologist Kevin Coles published their findings and conclusions in a paper which can be found at academia.edu. Since they were not allowed to excavate, they could only hypothesize what their findings mean, relying on legends and limited biographical information. From what I've discovered, I've come to my own conclusions. One anomaly they discovered was a brick wall dividing William's grave from that of his wife Anne. As part of their investigation, researchers found that into the 19th century, this wall was visible on the floor of the church, but the top portion was eventually removed and replaced with paving stones. This wall was probably an outward expression of William and Anne Shakespeare's relationship, since her pregnancy forced them to marry. In The Tempest, Act 4, Scene 1, Shakespeare as Prospero is likely speaking from experience as he gives Miranda and Ferdinand engagement advice. "Take my daughter, but if thou dost break her virgin knot before all sanctimonious ceremonies may with holy rite be ministered, no sweet aspersion shall the heavens let fall to make this contract grow, but barren hate, sour-eyed disdain, and discord shall bestrew the union of your bed with weeds so loathly that you shall hate it both." Famously, the only thing William Shakespeare left his wife in his will was his second-best bed with the furniture. In the survey, they found something unusual under the oddly shaped stone covering the west end of his grave, a rectangular brick or stone-walled structure. Its appearance suggests a small crypt with the oddly shaped stone as its lid. This feature and the previously mentioned wall must have been installed contemporaneously with or prior to William's burial. If it had been installed later, it would have required the removal of all the surrounding ledger and paving stones, excavation into 3 graves, compaction of the dirt supporting the structure, and backfilling, leveling, and compacting the dirt under all those stones. We know this didn't happen because in the radar survey, we can see voids in each of the graves. These voids are created by the decomposition of a body which allows the earth to settle. The voids in each of these graves begin and end at slightly different depths. Sometimes in church floors, these voids cause settling and an uneven surface. When this happens, the ledger stone can be removed, the hole filled with dirt, and the stone returned to its place. I think William was buried under the lighter colored ledger stone, in the fetal position. This would be possible following rigor mortis. From church records, we know he was buried on April 25th, but his death date of April 23rd is speculation. There is no record of his death. Rigor mortis can last up to 72 hours, but burial 2 to 4 days after death was common. I think Shakespeare had his manuscripts and library placed in that structure to eventually be recovered.
He was not of an age, but for all time.
Ben Jonson wrote this tribute in his eulogy for his friend William Shakespeare 400 years ago. This eulogy was included at the beginning of Shakespeare's first folio, and it is full of parallels to Shakespeare's play The Tempest. I refer to these parallels as clues that are easily passed over in a cursory examination. Be aware that the number 3, or finding words and similar ideas in triplicate, is extremely important in recognizing these clues. One very unusual aspect of this eulogy is that it begins with a 16-line prologue. Why would a eulogy need a prologue? Because this is much more than a simple eulogy. He doesn't actually begin eulogizing until line 17 with, "I therefore will begin, soul of the age." So let's figure out what this prologue is preparing us for, or trying to help us take notice of in the rest of the eulogy. To draw no envy, Shakespeare, on thy name am I thus ample to thy book and fame. Let's remember this word, envy, as we get closer to the end of the prologue. On line 3, he begins a seemingly enigmatic explanation. While I confess thy writings to be such as neither man nor muse can praise too much, 'tis true, and all men's suffrage, but these ways were not the paths I meant unto thy praise. Ben Jonson is saying that Shakespeare deserves our praise, but he wants to go about it in a different way, or at least not just praise for praise sake, but with a purpose. He continues, "For silliest, or most pitiable, ignorance on these may light, which when it sounds, but echoes right, or blind affection, which doth ne'er advance the truth, but gropes, and urgeth all by chance." Okay, keep that word envy in mind here. "Or crafty malice, which might pretend this praise, and think to ruin where it seemed to raise." The next sentence continues the same idea on a slightly different tack. "There are as some infamous bawd or whore should praise matron, what could hurt her more?" These two sentences appear to anticipate the authorship question, with envy as a motive. You may want to pause the video here and reread this prologue with this in mind. He gives the remedy here in the last 2 lines. "But thou art proof against them, and indeed above the ill fortune of them or the need." The thou he is referring to is Shakespeare in his book. Ben Jonson is giving clues in his praise to help us find the truth of what Shakespeare hid in his plays. Twice more in the eulogy, Ben Jonson refers to the folio as a living extension of Shakespeare himself. The second time is found on line 22. "Thou art a monument without a tomb and art still alive, while thy book doth live, and we have wits to read and praise to give. The third is found 16 lines up from the end of the second page. Look how the Father's face lives in his issue, even so the race of Shakespeare's mind and manners brightly shines in his well-turned and true-filed lines.
So what exactly is the prologue preparing us to find out? And how is Shakespeare proof against them?
The prologue contains 3 important words or ideas: ignorance, blindness, and truth. We only find them again, but reversed in order, near the end of that last sentence. Allow me to reread and finish this very important sentence. Look how the Father's face lives in his issue, even so the race of Shakespeare's mind and manners brightly shines in his well-turned and true-filed lines, and each of which he seems to shake a lance as brandished at the eyes of ignorance. The word truth returns as true. Blindness and ignorance return combined as the eyes of ignorance. These returning and answering clues serve to bracket shake a lance. This shake a lance is a play on the name Shakespeare, a lance being the type of spear found on Shakespeare's coat of arms. It is also an example of the clues we should look for in order for us to find Shakespeare in the text of his plays. The play The Tempest was the last play Shakespeare wrote without collaboration. Oddly, it is the first we find in the first folio. This was on purpose. On page 3 of The Tempest we find trident shake, a trident being the god Neptune's 3-pronged spear, leaving us with spear shake or shake spear. Another important correlation between The Tempest and Ben Jonson's eulogy to Shakespeare are the groups of 3s. In the eulogy, there are 7 groups of 3 that match with 7 groups of 3 in The Tempest, in order, though not necessarily order of appearance. The first group of 3 in The Tempest is found in Act 1, Scene 2. In this scene, Prospero, accompanied by Miranda, is calling Caliban forth from the stone. We are told 3 times that Caliban is kept by Prospero in what sounds like a grave or grave ledger stone. These 3 are the only mortal inhabitants of the island. The first group in the eulogy, Chaucer, Spenser, and Beaumont, are all buried in Poets' Corner of Westminster Abbey. Ancient Chaucer aligns with Prospero, Spenser with Miranda, and Beaumont, who was almost asked to take up his grave and move along, with Caliban. The next group of 3 in The Tempest is also found in Act 1, Scene 2. Ferdinand, whom Ariel chased off the ship and helped ashore, is about to join Prospero's family. He lines up with Lily in the second group in the eulogy. Kid is Miranda, and Marlowe is Prospero. These 2 groups, in which Prospero is represented, serve to bracket the Shakespeare folio equivalence sentence found in the middle section of the eulogy. As I've shown in previous videos, Prospero is Shakespeare. In The Tempest, Act 5, Scene 1, Prospero says that, upon my retirement, every third thought shall be my grave. Group 3, found in The Tempest, are the 3 good dead nobles. They align with the 3 Greek tragic playwrights. Thundering Aeschylus, for Gonzalo, because he talked so much, and when awakened by Ariel called out, "Now, good angels, preserve the king!" Euripides and Sophocles, for Adrian and Francisco. Group 4 in The Tempest are the sailors, right in the middle because they are dead and in limbo for almost the entire play. The 4th group in the eulogy are the Roman playwrights, Pacuvius and Accius, for the Master and Boatswain, and Hymn of Cordova Dead, which is actually Seneca the Younger, for the anonymous mariners. Ben Jonson, in his eulogy, wanted to call forth these Greeks and Romans to live again. Prospero, in Act 5, Scene 1, had the dead nobles and sailors enter a conjuring circle he had made to restore them to life. Group 5 in The Tempest consists of Caliban and his 2 cohorts that survived the shipwreck, Stephano and Trinculo. They meet in Act 2, Scene 2. Their correlation in the eulogy is with the nations. The phrases, "Insolent Greece" and "haughty Rome" sound odd, but Ariel made Trinculo appear insolent to his would-be king Stephano. Stephano, the would-be king, became haughty in his authority. So haughty Rome represents Stephano, and insolent Greece for Trinculo. The third nation, my Britain, is Caliban, of whom Prospero was referring when in Act 5, Scene 1, he says, "This thing of darkness I acknowledge mine." Group 6 in The Tempest shows up in Act 4, Scene 1, and aligns with the 6th group in the eulogy. Roman sister goddesses Ceres and Juno align with the Greek goddesses, the Muses, and their sibling god Apollo in the eulogy. The Greek messenger goddess Iris in The Tempest aligns with the Roman messenger god Mercury in the eulogy. Shakespeare's incongruous grouping of Roman and Greek goddesses is ingeniously maintained, although reversed by Ben Jonson with Greek and Roman goddesses and gods. The final group of 3 in The Tempest are the dead bad nobles, Antonio, Alonso, and Sebastian. These 3 align with the Greek comedic playwrights, tart Aristophanes with unpleasant Antonio, neat Terence with King Alonso, who appears normal in the play, but we know better, and witty Plautus with the joker Sebastian. In Act 5, Scene 1, Prospero levels his indictment against them as he forgives them, saying of his brother Sebastian, "Unnatural though thou art." Ben Jonson said of the merry Greeks, "They were not of nature's family." If you have been looking for 3s, you may have noticed that the eulogy is divided into 3 sections. The 16-line prologue, the 16-line wrap-up the prologue was preparing us for, which also contained the most unencumbered praise of Shakespeare in the eulogy, and all the stuff in the middle. These 2 16 lines are followed by a third in the Tempest epilogue. As printed in the first folio, it has 2 lines followed by an offset 16-line sentence followed by another 2 lines. This awkward 16-line sentence is almost always divided into more sentences by later editors. In the folio, there are only 3 epilogues, separate from the text of their respective plays. This is the only one that is a continuation of the plot of its play.
My name is Mark Birch, and I hope you'll like this video and subscribe so you can catch my other videos as I get to the point of Shakespeare's project.